Good morning, everybody. Thanks. As just discussed, let's see if our slides will pop up. Yep. We're going to talk about personalization and profit. Obviously, with what's happening in the economic climate, we have a view that profit becomes more and more important. So that's what Johan is going to talk about. I just want to do a brief intro and then hand over actually to Johan, because he is giving the in-depth experience in the field. So from a background, Tjeerd Brenninkmeijer, I overlook Europe for Bloomreach, and Johan Terpstra from Yawiss, an expert MarTech engineer, but he will show that in a few minutes. So from a timeline perspective, as stated, briefly talk about Bloomreach, why we're here, and then really go in depth into the topic we would like to present today. So Bloomreach, what's Bloomreach all about? We basically look at our company from a three-pillar perspective. We have an engagement product, which is marketing automation in the CDP. Then we have a headless CMS, which is basically a content management system delivering the content of an online environment. And then we have a product discovery solution, which is delivering the product search, but also the recommendations and the categories and basically the product grid. If you basically look at that whole suite, which we call the Commerce Experience Cloud, you can run all the way from campaign to conversion. So you have one suite, one product portfolio, which can cover all the personalization and all the channels, from the start of the campaign to the conversion on the website. The uniqueness of the product is the underlying layer, which is that blue part, where we combine the customer data and the product data. And by knowing everything about the customer and everything about the product, we can optimize the customer journey. We can A/B test all the elements throughout that journey and look at what's the best way to convert that customer online. So when you look at some customers, this is obviously not a full list of our customers, but for example, customers like Ahold or Jumbo, or customers like Marjorie, G-Star, are some of the Dutch brands we work for. Other brands you might know, Ralph Lauren, North Face, PVH, are customers of ours. And here you can see sort of the industries we work for. And then a bit about the company. We're around 1,000 people, backed by quite some large VC firms, almost $500 million in funding. Really proud on a high Glassdoor score, and also a high score on the Employee Net Promoter Score. So we care a lot about our people, and our view, that's the way how to make sure that the customers could be successful. We have an office in Amsterdam, actually in Zuid, so I have around 100 people here in the Netherlands. Also offices in London, Munich, Bratislava, Paris, and we have some people in Dubai, so doing more and more in the Middle East. So this is the story about Bloomreach, but I want to hand over to Johan for the in-depth information.
All right. Thank you, Tjeerd. Right. Obviously, this whole stack that Tjeerd just explained is all about being customer obsessed. And I just wanted to start off with a reference to yearly research done by Forrester. Everybody here, CRO, the analytics people, of course, they know about how personalization and how being customer focused has a lot of benefits. But that's just not just us saying it. Time and time again, research shows those companies with the highest customer-obsessed attitudes, they really rock it in terms of profitability, revenue growth, all the other KPIs. Just to reiterate this as a kickoff point. So maybe you can answer this for yourself, try to answer it honestly. How good is your organization's customer experience, or how has it evolved over the last few years? And the reason for asking is, again, another bit of research by Forrester. They do this every year, so they can basically compare and see where the industry as a whole is going. But about 20% of big brands, they kind of dropped the ball on this. The customer experience index dropped. So obviously we're here today to learn how to do better. But it seems like me, you, maybe not quite doing a super job. So let's explore that a little bit further and let's have a look at how we might change these things. But of course, especially since the whole pandemic and all the resulting issues in terms of supply chain, etc., it's not easy anymore these days. Probably, there's a lot of digital leads, marketing managers here. You've got a ton of unfillable vacancies. There's pressure from all sides. The customers are demanding. They don't just want to do next day delivery anymore. They want to have same day delivery. So you have to really get up to these expectations. And I know that's not easy. But we're here to give you some ideas about how you might give a twist to these things and change tactics a little bit so you can improve your situation at your organization. So I'd really like you to absorb these ideas and maybe bring them back into your organization. And if it works out, then please get in touch in a few months and let me know how you fare. So yeah, my approach to this, and I work with, I'm a freelance contractor, I work with a bunch of clients, so I'm lucky in that sense that I can get a feel for not just what's playing in one company, but it's about 4 at the moment. And I see that not one, but multiple face these issues. And one tactic that we are exploring now is basically this idea of these old KPIs. All of us work with these. They're kind of all revenue-based, and revenue doesn't really tell you the whole story, does it? I mean, yeah, it's nice to grow revenue, but at what expense? Is it sustainable revenue? So these are, I call them marketing KPIs, and the marketing KPIs is great for your marketing department, but when it comes to the finance department, when it comes to investors, to shareholders, they prefer other KPIs, don't they? Commercial businesses, and I appreciate not everyone here is probably a commercial business, but mostly they talk one language, that's profit. And profit is under pressure. It's hard to grow these days with inflation, rising costs from the supply chain, from your staff, etc. The MarTech stack, the license fees, they aren't getting cheaper these days. So how might we get profit into the mix for CRO, for marketing purposes? It's April now, so some of the more unlucky businesses about this time of the month, they get revenue and profit figures from Q1. So just think about that. It's April, and only now you learn about what happened in January. Was January even profitable? Some of the more forward, more agile, financially agile companies a little bit faster. It's month on month often, so around this time you might get an idea of how you did in March. But again, it's a 1 month delay. We live in a real-time world, but why don't we get profit data in real time? So that's something we're gonna explore. So product margin, I'm focusing here on products. I'm building an example from an e-commerce store, but equally it could be like a travel agent or anything where you have a sell price and some costs. It could be buy cost or something that adds up to a certain cost of sale. But product margin, so we don't want to move it from this delayed profit margin at the very end of the funnel or even sort of behind the funnel that we talk about and move it forward. So it's not a quarter that we're interested in. We want to, it's also not a month. At order levels, I see some companies have an idea of profit at order level, but that's still at the end of the funnel. It's still late. I mean, how can you optimize your website based on an order? Yeah, sure, the next order perhaps, but you can't influence this order if only then you have profit data. So let's move it forward again. Some companies have some idea of the cart value and then the cost of the items in the cart. And that's all right, because then you can influence at least the checkout. If it's lower margin items, you might make a selection in your shipping options. You might You might get rid of like an expensive payment option because it would further reduce your order level product margin. But for me, it's still too late in the funnel, because this is where I want it. I want it at the landing page when they land right away. I want to have it right away so I can actually make decisions based on profit margin. So I call it in-session product margin, not halfway the funnel, not a month late. That's all rubbish. I want to have it at the landing page. So let's see how we do that. Here's a fairly typical, I think, example use case. You have an online store, maybe like 12K SKUs, and you need to somehow present a selection of that, maybe on your homepage, on a blog, or maybe like an email blog. So obviously you can't fit 12K items in there, can you? You have some tooling, could be Bloomreach, could be any of the other vendors, maybe some machine learning, some AI, and that brings down the 12K SKUs for you, personalized, one-on-one. It brings it down to 50 items that would really perfectly suit you. High chance that you'd be interested, that's fine. So we went from 12K to 50. But still, you can't fit 50 in an email blog, can you? You can't fit 50 in a recommendation blog. Website will slow down, or you'll be endlessly scrolling right. So here's the challenge. How do we then pick the 6 items that we can show from the 50? I mean, the 50 are fine. You could just make it random. It's already better than, some of the old school approaches. But we're interested in the next level. So how do we pick the 6? So imagine your product tiles, 6 product tiles in a block, recommended items. Most of the time this happens on like a KPI, like conversion rate, or some idea of this is a bestseller, or this item is hot. And that's fine, that's okay, that'll work. But we've been already, with my clients, next level, always look for better ways. So instead of just doing conversion rate, we might look at return rates or some element of seasonality. So not just the past 30 days, but what happened the next 30 days last year. Is there an upward trend? We might take into account reviews. You're not going to promote on the first tile a high converting item with absolutely terrible reviews, because it'll probably come back as a return. And we all know that costs a lot of money. So you can make it more clever, that's fine. But again, none of that is profit. And as the CRO lead, as a performance marketer, that's what you want ultimately. If you can bring profit into the fold, your management will probably be impressed. So coming up in the rest of this presentation is at least an abstraction of how we are, with one client, we're planning to do this, and with the other, we're in the process of doing this. And I'd love for you to implement at least parts of this and let me know how you get on. But we'll introduce product margin percentile, and I'll explain how we get to that. So how do we do this? In-session product profit margin. And I just want to give you an overview of the pieces of the stack. I mean, it could be, you could swap them out. So most of the data science happens in Google BigQuery, it could be Azure, it could be spreadsheets. Magento as the e-commerce platform, could be Shopify, could be Spryker, anything. Could have a PIM in there, feeds it into Channable. Channable then feeds it perhaps to something like Bloomreach Engagement, or any of the other sort of the front-end orchestration tooling. Just to paint you a picture you might relate to, but it's swappable. So how do we start? You have your 12K SKUs, make a list of them, and then of course you have a sell price. Take off the VAT. You know your buy price, or at least your purchasing department does, so you can ask your BI team, for example, if you have one, and otherwise the purchasers, to give you that data. Marry that up, and then you get your margin, which is the difference. And now we're getting to something that we can implement on your website. This is the HTML of your product block. It's got the SKUs and the price, and then you introduce your margin, right? Probably not like this. This is absolute margin. Of course, any high-ticket item will have the highest margin, probably. You're going to put your 200 euros item at the front. It's going to be a nightmare. So let's not do that. Add a new column. At least make it a percentage. So now you can sort it, and it doesn't matter whether it's high ticket or low ticket. Now you have a percentage margin. So let's do that. Or maybe not, because percentage, of course, you know, it's better to sort on. I mean, there's some benefits to it. But what we're doing here, we're giving away very sensible information on the front end to your competitors. So that, again, is not how to do it. So how can you make it a little bit more secretive? So you can still focus, still measure it. So you could bucket it. It's one idea. I mean, it could be low, medium, high. It could be a scale of 1 to 10. It's getting a little bit better. But, you know, for analytics, we like numbers. Finance is numbers. So, again, not great. So here's the idea. We settled on margin percentile. We also looked at indexing. Indexing is like a two-step approach. You need to find a mean and then calculate the index. Could work, but it's an extra step. So for now, we settled on margin percentile. So you compare every single item's margin to the rest of your list of SKUs, and then basically come to a number from 0 to 100. You could also do 0 to 1. How do you do this? This is an example from Google Sheets. So just percentage rank. And for those not familiar with percentile measurements, basically 100% means that 100% of the other values is below this one. 0 is none are below this one, aka everything is above this one. So this gives you a relative idea of margin per product without actually telling how much margin. So we're gonna mark up the website with this. Could look something like this. Margin percentile, 100. Zoom in a little bit on that. So now your competitors might look at this and think, oh, what's that? That looks cool. They might even figure out 100 probably means it's the highest margin. But are you actually telling your margins? You're not. I mean, you're giving an indication of which ones are interesting maybe for your competitors to also source, but you're not giving away actual sensitive data. I mean, you could obfuscate this more if you want. But we believe that this is fine. Margin percentile for every SKU, mark it up, so you can then basically tag it, track it. So you pick it up from the DOM, or you push it to the data layer. And of course, once you have it in your data layer, you pick it up for GA4, for your analytics vendors. You could even push it to Facebook, for example, if you want to build audiences there based on the average percentile that they are exposed to. But that's the route how you get it in. Well, then what? You've done your markup, you're feeding your margin data into your reporting sources, maybe into your data warehouse. Here's an example of Bloomreach engagement. So basically, we're going to calculate the baseline. That's all we do right now. We're not going to change anything, just the baseline. So maybe like 30 days, or depending on your traffic, when it gets statistically significant. So you tag this on all the relevant events. So it could be impression lists, list views, it could be select item, item details, add to carts, all of those, add to wish list, anything where you might want to influence later how you're going to sort these items to make a better selection and hopefully steer it in the right way. So we're just going to record a baseline and that's it. That's already quite useful because you're measuring what's the result of how we do business right now. Now, some of you will pick these blocks, the order of these blocks, just leave it to the machine learning, that's fine. Some have, maybe you have an editorial team, like merchandisers who do this. Sometimes it's the boss's opinion, and then all the data says, no, you're not right. Boss says, I want this item there. That's fine too. But let's just measure our current tactic and how does it work? How do you get like an average? And here, it's in a sample set, it's like 38. So that's percentile. So that's not 38% margin, but it's the 38 percentile on the average. So, and that's something we're going to then, after we record this baseline, we're going to try and influence. How? Ideally, you A/B test various tactics. You shuffle something forward, shuffle it a little bit. But of course, you know, we're not going to only put it on percentile. We want to do like a weighted sorting. We're still not going to put the best, the highest percentile up front if we know it has a poor conversion rate, or if it has terrible reviews. So we want to do this sensibly, but at least we have a new data point that we can bring into this weighted sort of sorting, so we can shift the needle a bit. So again, if you think about the 12K to 50 recommendations to a block of 6, chances are from the 50, some will be fairly equal. So my idea is, if all else is equal, so the pretty good products, low returns, decent reviews, then I will want to give preference to the higher margin items. Because usually, the first items get more attention, hopefully more sales, the detail to cart ratio, etc. They're all influenced by this positioning. So we're going to try and move the needle. And you can get creative about this. There's multiple ways to do this. But of course, if you're used to reporting on your traditional KPIs, on the marketing KPIs, and your reports maybe even have alerts. If this drops, then all hell breaks loose. Everyone breaks into a sweat if your conversion rate drops. Just beware that if you start optimizing for profit, it means your conversion rate might drop a little bit. Now, hopefully not to a point where profit also hurts in other KPIs, but it could be that all of these traditional KPIs go down a little bit, but profit goes up. And that's sort of the sweet spot you need to find. But you need to make your stakeholders aware of this, because some people might be surprised if you didn't tell them that you're going to basically push for profit instead of this return on ad spend, for example. So you got your baseline, then you made your improvements. You see shift a little bit. The average percentile in your views or your add to carts, or maybe even your purchases, is climbing. So naturally, the expected result will be that next quarter, when finance department is done doing their magic, that they're quite happy with what you brought into the fold. So then the question is, what are you going to do with that? With the extra profit? May not be totally up to you, but if you were the ones to spend the extra money, how would you? And then we go back to the start. So profit is up. All the pressures that I mentioned, staffing, your immense backlog with your agency who's understaffed. So they always say, yeah, next week, and then 6 deploys later, it's still not there. You can make better compensation packets for your best staff. They're all leaving because headhunters and all that. So basically, bring that profit back into everything that helps you with the being customer obsessed, with the personalization, with your MarTech stack, with better tooling. Maybe you're working on composable architecture, which isn't cheap either. So reinvest it. Maybe the shareholders, they want a little bit of it too. But if you reinvest it and then basically make everything better, and if you're the ones who can introduce this at your company, it might be quite good for your own career too. And that is the idea. Thank you for listening.
Yes, finally you are allowed to move again.
Yeah.
Phew, that was a long time standing. Questions for these lovely gentlemen? Please raise your hand. I'll try to run to you with my microphone. Otherwise, I'm going to make up questions. No questions?
I can always, and this is one example we gave from a profitable growth perspective. A different, before we had this conversation, we had some drinks at the bar, coffee, and we actually spoke about which segments should you target. So that's a different way to look at it. So if you look at like some of your segments are driving revenue, but are not driving profit. So if you identify which segment is actually costing you money because they have a lot of returns, for example, or they're clicking on all your advertisements in all your different channels, you can remove that segment from your targeting. So there's all kinds of ways how to apply this philosophy. And this was obviously a lot more around recommendations, but it is a new way of thinking. So, but then we can still go back to the questions.
I'm the budget owner for marketing, and I'm allowed to put budgets on SEO, PPC, CRO, personalization. What will be your answer? Your defender, sorry, you could say 100%. A guesstimate number. What would be good? What are leading companies doing budget-wise?
Well, I would say I would give not a direct answer to that, but to me the problem is, and I work with all these marketers and the analysts, and for me the issue is they're not being given these tools. So if they come up with an idea like, oh, we want to have this really cool search vendor, built into our website, or we want to finally do proper experimentations. So they build a business case and they get some industry numbers saying, oh, probably conversion rate goes up by X, so we have this, X amount extra revenue. So they need to build these business cases, and then management will approve it or not. But they're not being given the key numbers. They're not being given profit. Like even the finance department gives you your monthly results. That's still not tied back to products, is it? That's still not tied back to customers, probably. That's like overall. So why don't we give these people, the marketers, the CRO people, why don't we give them the product level margin data so they can actually use it in their mix of KPIs? And then comes answering your question, because then you have a data-driven approach to say, we can shift the needle on profit mostly with tool X. Maybe less with that, more with that. And then they can, in their business case, they have some real data. They can at least show the baseline, and then they can say, look, we think we can move profit from X to Y instead of revenue. Revenue means nothing. Like Amazon had hundreds of millions of revenue for years, but 20 million loss. That's not sustainable for most companies here. Maybe Coolblue and Bol, maybe they can suffer a loss like that for a while, but most companies can't. So why don't we give all of you profit data?
Yeah, so this is more like most companies are trying now, but they're trying with a really old car, and they should try with a better car.
Yeah, I mean, you're being given the wrong or old, outdated perhaps KPIs. So you're like blindfolded. You need to do magic, but without the full set of numbers. There's like the management, they're allowed to know this, but you're not allowed to know this. But we are going to sack you if, profit is not good. So it's not fair.
I've seen a lot of data layers where the profit margins were in a data layer, which is fun to spy on. But that's something else. Do you have case studies on your website from Bloomreach for companies that are driving this new car and indeed are getting to results where you also present the real numbers on the cases?
The answer, yes, simple. Actually, at the last Emerce event, Emerce Retail, we were on stage with Goossens, which is selling furniture. And in that presentation, they share all the numbers. And to echo the words from Johan, he starts with, you need to have access to all that data. So in our view, you need to have access to the data, you need to have the intelligence, and then be able to action on all that information in one system. And that's what we often see, is that it's really hard to have all that in one place, to be able to actually focus on what we call the CAC to LTV, or at least the retail formula. And to answer your question, what we see nowadays with a lot of our customers is that they're shifting their ad spend budget to a lot more loyalty. So instead of purely driving and focusing on new customers, they focus on the profit they want to make. So yes, the website is bloomreach.com obviously, and that's where you can find case studies with a lot of data on what happens if you start to drive a new car.
It's yes, you have 1 minute for the question and the answer. So if you can answer already.
Very quick. Hi, Erwin Bogert for Emerce. Question for Tjeerd. Tjeerd, I'm a bit of an outsider on the matter of your company, so the question is the following. Why is it so revolutionary for customers of yours to focus on profitability? It seems quite ordinary to do that, so why now this sudden, I don't know, 1 minute? Thanks.
Yeah, the shift was during the pandemic, obviously all the e-commerce businesses were growing and everybody just focused on revenue growth. And what you see in the current economic climate is a shift towards sustainable growth in which you need profit. Why is not everybody doing that? Is because often all that information is not available, as Johan said. If you have old tech or if you have a lot of silos, what's happening? And so if you cannot combine product data and customer data, we're the first one globally which is bringing that all together, then it's really hard to be able to do a simple case which we just discussed and actually focus on margin and profit.
Yeah, we're in the new future now. Money used to be free. Funding used to be like for free, so you could grow, didn't care about any profit at all. But now we're in the new future and we need to make profits to become sustainable. So thank you very much, Bloomreach, Tjeerd, and thank you very much from Yawiss, Johan.
Thank you, Tom.